Today, we're going to embark on a journey, once again, of history. Last time we saw the origins of JRPGs on the 80s. I showed 10 of the most historically significant JRPGs on that decade. So today is the 90s turn. 10 most historically important JRPGs of the 90s. And before we begin, let me clarify that the following list, just like in the previous video, was done in chronological order. That clarified? Let's begin! Number 10. Dragon Warrior 4. Dragon Warrior 4, originally known as Dragon Quest IV Chapters of the Chosen, was released in Japan on February 11, 1990 and in North America on October of 1992, over 2 years later after its initial release. It was designed and written once again by Yuji Horii with character art from famous Dragon Ball artist Akira Toriyama. We saw how the first Dragon Quest game became a pioneer in the industry on the first video and a father of turn-based RPGs in Japan. However, the historical impact Dragon Warrior 4 had at the early 90s, both in the East and the West, was significantly major. It was the game that threw the series into commercial success worldwide and also the one that perfected the mechanics previous entries had. Instead of centering around one main character, the game had 5 different story arcs, including one character so iconic in Japan that would later spawn its own title for the PlayStation. Its legacy will help it with 2 remakes, one for the PS1 but only in Japan, and another one for the Nintendo DS worldwide. Dragon Quest IV sold 3.1 million copies in Japan, and it is considered as one of the best, if not the best RPG on the system. Its gigantic impact will heavily influence many other RPGs in the future. Number 9. Seiken Densetsu. Seiken Densetsu, known in North America as Final Fantasy Adventure and Mystic Quest in Europe, it's a Final Fantasy spin-off released for the Game Boy on June 28, 1991 in Japan and until November in North America on the same year. It wouldn't arrive in Europe until 1993. It is the first installment of the Mana series and the precursor of a big legacy in the action RPG genre. The game plays in an overview with one character fighting with a sword in a very primitive hack-and-slash system, also taking elements from the original Legend of Zelda when transitioning to another screen. It was a commercial success, spawning one of the most historically important series in the industry and, of course, an overly successful sequel called Secret of Mana for the SNES. This title, also known as Seiken Densetsu 2, was released on August 6, 1993, received with critical acclaim, later to become a cult classic with several ports to many different systems, including modern consoles. It's also considered as one of the best RPGs for the Super Nintendo. However, despite its huge success, the sequel, Seiken Densetsu 3, released in 1995, was never released outside Japan and still stands today as one controversial classic that some fans even deem it superior to its predecessor. In any case, Seiken Densetsu conquered the field of early action JRPGs and influenced the industry for future titles in the genre. Number 8. Shining Force. Shining Force: The Legacy of Great Intention was released as an exclusive for the Sega Genesis on March 20, 1992 in Japan. It wouldn't meet the outside world until July 1993. It was conceived by the Takahashi brothers, who back then worked for Sonic Software Planning, with the interest overflowing in Japan for the recently adopted strategy RPG genre, With franchises such as Fire Emblem and Land Greaser meeting some success, the Takahashi brothers wanted to create a fresh formula with friendlier mechanics, since they weren't fans at all of those other two franchises. So they came up with a humble new technique that was met with commercial success, immediately spawning an entire universe of its own with sequels and spin-offs all over the place. Shining Force quickly became a giant pillar in the tactical genre with more simple mechanics that the West welcomed with open arms, contrary to Fire Emblem and Land Greaser with much harder difficulties and complex features. To date, many different things influenced the departure of the series from the strategy world, but it irrefutably remains as a pioneer in the industry and one of the very first tactical JRPGs the world met at the early 90s. Number 7. Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI in reality. Final Fantasy saved Square from its economical problems back in 1987 when the first title for the Famicom came out in Japan. However, this game wasn't localized to North America until 1990 when Dragon Quest IV was already out. Square needed to keep competing with Enix and released 2 more titles for the Famicom that weren't released outside Japan back then. So to North America, Final Fantasy II and III didn't exist yet, at least not until the release of the Super Nintendo, when Square was already publishing Final Fantasy IV, V, and VI. Final Fantasy IV was therefore localized as Final Fantasy II to some commercial success. Final Fantasy V was again omitted, and Final Fantasy VI was localized as Final Fantasy III on April 2, 1994. It was a huge mess that would later cause many controversies worldwide, but one fact remained during this era. This Final Fantasy III title changed the course of RPGs in the history of gaming. Not only was it a commercial success, but also met with critical acclaim, establishing many RPG mechanics in both storytelling and turn-based battle systems as the pinnacle of the genre. It sold 3.48 million units worldwide, and it established a colossal fanbase considered today as one of the best RPGs of all time. Final Fantasy III will later be clarified as Final Fantasy VI on the anthology release for the PlayStation, and will remain that way for future ports and remakes alike. Number 6. Chrono Trigger. On March 11, 1995, yet another RPG that revolutionized the industry was released, also by Square, still with people who have worked on the Final Fantasy series, such as designer Hironobu Sakaguchi, working with the Dragon Quest team, their main competitors, including Yuji Horii supporting the script and Akira Toriyama on the character design. This game will also launch the careers of main scriptwriter Masato Kato and music composer Yasunori Mitsuda, both critically acclaimed figures in the history of gaming. It was called the Dream Team, a group of people who knew very well what they were doing when developing what would later become one of the best RPGs of all time, as considered by many people and the absolute best by millions of fans. It had a main focus on its time travel plot, with a story involving side quests on character development, multiple endings, and a battle system that was the epitome of all previous turn-based RPGs out there. The legacy this game generated needs no explanation, since it is undoubtedly one of the most iconic video games of all time. Number 5. Tactics Ogre. The same year, other companies had very different mindsets and were heavily influenced by strategy games. One such company was Quest. Their focus on tactical mechanics will eventually lead them to create Ogre Battle: March of the Black Queen for the Super Nintendo in 1993. It was a very unique video game that involved battles and navigation on real-time system, different from what they will create and publish on October 6, 1995. Tactics Ogre Let Us Climb Together conceived by Quest designer Yasumi Matsuno. It played quite different from games like Fire Emblem or Shining Force. This was in an isometric point of view, with characters being able to move to other squares by jump animations. The game also had multiple endings and a non-linear plot that strongly focused on the story and characters, mainly on the medieval and political conflict in between them. The Super Nintendo version, however successful, wasn't released outside Japan until its port to the PlayStation in 1997. It had been previously ported to the Sega Saturn and much later for the PSP, where it met its true worldwide success, quickly becoming a cult classic. This game revolutionized storytelling in Japanese RPGs, mainly for its focus on political conflict between human characters. Such was the influence on the game that popularized the genre in 1998, Final Fantasy Tactics, developed mainly by Matsuno and other key figures of Quest after quitting the company right after Tactics Ogre had been published. Final Fantasy Tactics would then go on to create a legacy of its own, but never forgetting the revolutionary title that had come before, its father, Tactics Ogre. Number 4. Tales of Phantasia. By the end of 1995, a year already established as a golden year for RPGs, even though the Super Nintendo was nearing its lifespan, a small development team called Wolf Team developed a title called Tales of Phantasia on December 15, written and programmed by Yoshiharu Gotanda. The idea revolved around a group of characters fighting in what Wolf Team called the linear motion battle system, basically played out in a 2D area out of random encounters. It was a real-time action system, slightly influenced by the Mana series. Despite meeting success in Japan, mainly thanks to Namco publishing the game, it was never released anywhere else, not even in its port to the PlayStation, until the Game Boy Advance version in 2006, where the Tales of series had already made a name for itself. Fan translations had been done before for both original versions, and it was there when it created a niche following fanbase. However, Wolf Team and Namco would never see eye to eye after the release of it, so Yoshiharu Gotanda and other key members will then leave to create Tri-Ace, developing two other historically important RPGs from the 90s, Star Ocean, which had similar battle mechanics but in a science fiction universe, and Valkyrie Profile, with strong influence from the Nordic mythology. Nevertheless, Phantasia laid the basis of one of the most successful RPG franchises of all time and became a pioneer in the action RPG genre with its revolutionary mechanics. Number 3. Suikoden. This is the start of my favorite video game series of all time, and a personal favorite also to many people, especially in Japan. It all began once again in 1995, when Konami realized that RPGs were starting to gain terrain all around the world. They wanted to compete in the market with their own franchise, so they hired director Yoshitaka Murayama alongside designer Junko Kawano to create Suikoden, with a script heavily influenced and loosely based on one of the 5 Chinese classic novels, Water Margin. Both the game and the book revolve around 808 characters that unite to create an army to fight a corrupted empire. Suikoden came out exactly the same day as Tales of Phantasia, December 15, 1995. It not only had a turn-based battle system with 6 active characters in the party, but also 2 more battle mechanics that involve duels, as in fighting games, but with a rock-paper-scissors system. That, and another one involving strategy elements, very similar to the Langrisser series, with characters moving around in small platoons to fight their enemies. Suikoden spawned a sequel in 1998 that failed at the beginning thanks to a very limited print run, but that over time became a huge classic since it had perfected the mechanics of the first title, creating a gigantic fanbase. Suikoden 2 is considered as one of the best RPGs of all time, and it belongs to an extremely unique and original series that paved the way for many other RPGs in the history of gaming as a revolutionary pioneer. Number 2. Final Fantasy VII. Speaking about revolutionary, here's one that came late to the party but that established itself as king among the genre, creating a true before and after. Final Fantasy VII became the departure of Square from Nintendo, home to most of its titles back in the 90s, moving on to the PlayStation. It was released on January 31, 1997, to meet extreme commercial outbursts, dozens of awards, massively popularizing the genre in the entire world. Final Fantasy VII was an evolution from previous RPGs, especially developed by Square, but not after being originally in development for the Super Nintendo. Due to hardware limitations, Square waited for the Nintendo 64, but delays, technical issues, and disagreements with Nintendo, they moved on to the PlayStation. It was the first title in the series to create a much major focus on the story and character development, including emotional traumas and psychological issues barely seen before in JRPGs. It was also the first title to use full motion video and 3D graphics in the series. So, despite having mechanics done and perfected before by other RPGs, Final Fantasy VII threw both the series and the Japanese genre into a worldwide rampage of popularity. Number 1. Xenogears. Xenogears was released on February 11, 1998 in Japan and October 20 in North America. It was never released anywhere else. Conceived by Tetsuya Takahashi and his wife Kaori Tanaka, it was a script proposed for a sequel to Chrono Trigger under the name of Project Noah. It was then proposed to be as Final Fantasy VII. However, the story involved several heavy religious themes and psychological issues in such a controversial manner that Squaresoft decided it would be better left alone as its own title. It then became Xenogears, with a story revolving around an orphan that one day encounters a giant gear that he can mysteriously pilot almost perfectly. The origin of this character, the gear, and all the plot surrounding them is strongly connected to the science fiction universe Takahashi and his wife created, alongside legendary writer Masato Kato. Xenogears was met with critical acclaim, and its commercial success proved Takahashi's point to Squaresoft despite having a rushed story on the second disc of the game. These differences made Takahashi leave the company and create his own called Monolith Soft, developing an entire series based on the Xenogears universe. Xenogears, however, became one of the most beloved titles on the PlayStation. It revolutionized storytelling in RPGs with a deep, mature, and complex plot that quickly established itself as a major influence on other video games of the early and late 2000s. Therefore, Xenogears will be forever seen as a cornerstone in the history of Japanese role-playing video games, with what I consider to be the absolute best story ever written in a JRPG.